The orphanage faced a bare Christmas, until a quiet Apache arrived with gifts of hope. The cold wind whispered through the small town, carrying tiny flakes of snow that danced lazily from the gray sky. Inside the orphanage, the children stirred quietly in their beds, rubbing sleepy eyes and yawning in the dim morning light. For most kids, Christmas was a day of excitement, of waking up to the smell of cookies, ribbons, and sparkling gifts. But here in the small brick building that had been home to so many children over the years, the morning felt different. There was a stillness that no one wanted to break. The air felt heavier than usual, filled with the weight of something missing. Outside, the ground was covered in a soft layer of white, but inside, the walls were bare. The caretaker, Mrs. Lillian, walked quietly from room to room, checking on the children. Her kind face carried lines of worry, and her eyes reflected a sadness she tried to hide. She had worked at the orphanage for nearly 20 years, and she had seen many Christmases come and go. Some were filled with joy, some with small surprises, but this year felt emptier than any she could remember. The donations had been fewer, the town's economy had been harsh, and the little orphanage was struggling to keep even the simplest things in stock. The children, sensing the quiet tension, tiptoed around the halls. They whispered to each other, speaking in soft voices so that even the faintest sound of disappointment would not reach Mrs. Score.
Lily.
Tiny Emily, only 5, clutched a worn doll to her chest and peeked out the window at the snow-covered yard. "Do you think Santa will come this year?" she asked her older brother Thomas, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas shrugged, trying to look brave even though he felt a tight knot of worry in his chest. At 12, he understood that sometimes Christmas could pass quietly, with no bells or songs and no presents waiting under a tree. In the common room, the older children gathered around a small, plain Christmas tree that had seen better days. Its branches were thin, and the needles had begun to fall, scattering across the floor like tiny green memories. There were a few handmade ornaments, crafted from scraps of paper and colored string, each one a symbol of effort and hope rather than luxury. The children had made them themselves, trying to bring some sparkle into their lives even when the world outside seemed harsh and indifferent. They hung the ornaments carefully, stepping back to admire their work, but the silence in the room reminded them that something was missing. Mrs. Lillian entered the room, carrying a tray with a simple breakfast, toast, a little butter, and some lukewarm tea. She placed the tray on the table and smiled gently at the children. "Good morning, my little ones," she said softly. "Merry Christmas." Her words sounded warm, but even she knew the feeling in the room didn't match the greeting. The children smiled back politely, but their smiles were small, and they quickly looked away, focusing on their breakfast instead. No one spoke about presents. There were no shiny packages wrapped in colorful paper, no ribbons and bows waiting under the tree. The stockings were empty, hanging quietly by the wall as if they were waiting for something that might never come. Some children tried to make jokes to lighten the mood, but the laughter felt forced, like a fragile mask over a deeper disappointment. Still, they tried. Even in the cold silence, they wanted to believe that Christmas could bring something special, even if it was just a tiny spark of joy. Emily tugged at Mrs. Lillian's sleeve. "Do you think Santa forgot us?" she asked, her big brown eyes filled with concern. Mrs. Barrett, Lillian knelt down beside her and held her small hands. "Santa doesn't forget, my dear," she said kindly. "Sometimes the best gifts don't come in boxes. Sometimes they come from the heart, from the kindness of people around us. And sometimes they come when we least expect them." Emily nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but trusting Mrs. Lillian's gentle voice. The children wandered around the orphanage, trying to find ways to fill the emptiness. Some played quietly with old toys, the paint chipped and the wheels worn, while others sat by the window gazing at the snow falling outside. The cold, crisp air of winter reminded them that the world continued outside their small walls, full of cheer and warmth that seemed to belong to everyone but them. A few of the older children huddled together and whispered ideas to create little games and small surprises for each other. They wanted to make the day special in the ways they could, even if no one else remembered them. Mrs. Lillian watched them with a mixture of pride and sorrow. She had spent years trying to make every Christmas feel magical, even with so little. She remembered the laughter of children in the past, the excitement of unwrapping even the smallest gift, and the feeling of community that came when neighbors brought donations and treats. But this year, the orphanage had been mostly forgotten. The streets outside were busy with shoppers and families preparing for festive meals. But inside, the orphanage waited quietly, almost invisible to the world. As the morning wore on, the children began to gather in the small common room again. Emily curled up on a threadbare rug with her doll. Thomas sat cross-legged on the floor, and others leaned against the walls or on the old wooden chairs. Mrs. Lillian brought out a small pot of cocoa, its warmth and sweet smell offering some comfort. "Let's drink to a little bit of happiness," she said softly. The children sipped the cocoa, the warmth spreading through their bodies, and for a moment there was a small spark of comfort. But the feeling was fragile, easily fading when they remembered what was missing. The silence returned heavier now, as the children tried to imagine what the day could have been. They thought of colorful lights, delicious food, and the laughter of families. They imagined gifts waiting under a tree, toys that squeaked or dolls with shiny hair. And yet, all around them, the reality was different. There were no presents, no decorations beyond their simple handmade ornaments, no songs to fill the air, just quiet walls and the soft ticking of a clock that seemed to count down the hours, slowly, painfully. Mrs. Lillian moved quietly among them, offering gentle words, soft touches, and encouragement. She reminded them that Christmas was not just about gifts, but about love, care, and togetherness. Yet even as she spoke, she knew that words could not fill the void of absence, could not replace the excitement and wonder that other children might take for granted. She prayed quietly that somehow, some way, the day would hold a miracle, even a small one, that would bring light into their hearts. Hours passed, and the children began to create their own little celebrations. They shared stories, sang softly, and played games with their imagination as their only toy. Laughter, shy and small at first, started to bubble up, blending with the soft sounds of the winter morning. It was not the loud, bustling Christmas of postcards and dreams, but it was their own, made richer by the bonds they shared and the hope that maybe, just maybe, the day could turn into something special. And so, the orphanage waited, quiet and bare, but still filled with a sense of anticipation. The children huddled together, their hearts fragile but hopeful, clinging to the possibility that something unexpected could arrive. Something to remind them that Christmas was more than empty walls and silent halls. And outside, beyond the snow and the gray sky, the day continued to unfold, holding secrets and surprises that none of them could yet imagine. The morning wore on slowly, the snow outside thickening into a soft blanket that covered the town in quiet white. Inside the orphanage, the children tried to keep themselves busy. Emily and Thomas were sitting near the small fireplace, their cheeks rosy from the cold that seeped through the thin walls. The older children were making paper snowflakes, cutting shapes carefully and folding them to make little designs. Every now and then, one of them would glance toward the door, half expecting someone to arrive, half hoping for a knock that would bring a surprise. And then, quietly, it happened. A soft knock echoed on the front door, barely loud enough to break the gentle hum of activity inside. Mrs. Lillian looked up first, her heart skipping a beat. Visitors were rare in the orphanage, especially on a Christmas morning when everyone else was busy with their families. She carefully stood, smoothing her dress, and walked to the door. The children, sensing something unusual, followed quietly, peeking over shoulders and around corners. When Mrs. Lillian opened the door, she found a man standing there. He was tall and lean, with dark hair streaked with gray, and his face carried the quiet dignity of someone who had lived through much but spoke little of it. His eyes, deep and steady, seemed to see everything at once. The children, the bare walls, the small tree with its handmade ornaments. He wore simple clothing, a coat that had clearly traveled many winters, and carried a worn satchel slung over his shoulder. There was something calm and unusual about him, a presence that made the orphanage feel both smaller and safer at the same time. "Good morning, Mrs. Darrigow," Lillian said politely, though she felt a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Can I help you?" The man nodded slightly, a gesture of respect rather than a greeting. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he shifted the satchel on his shoulder and glanced toward the children who were now gathered behind Mrs. Peckett. Lillian, their eyes wide with curiosity. They whispered among themselves, trying to guess who he was. Was he lost? Was he a traveler? Or could he be someone who had come to bring something special? The children were careful not to show too much hope. They had learned over the years that hope could sometimes be a fragile thing, but deep inside their hearts stirred. After a moment, the man finally spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of experience. "I heard there are children here who need a little help this morning." His words were simple, yet they held a gentle authority, a quiet promise that something unexpected might follow. Mrs. Lillian's eyes widened slightly, both surprised and relieved. It was rare for someone to come unannounced, especially on a morning when the world seemed to have forgotten them. "Children need help?" she repeated softly, unsure what to say. "Well, yes, we could always use some." The man did not interrupt, but instead he stepped inside slowly, taking off his coat and placing the satchel on the floor. The children watched him cautiously, their curiosity growing with each movement. He didn't make any sudden gestures, didn't try to draw attention to himself, and yet, somehow, his presence began to fill the room with a strange warmth. It was as if the very air around him carried the idea that something good was about to happen, even if no one could quite explain why. Emily stepped forward, clutching her worn doll tightly. She had never seen anyone like this man before. "Are you?" she asked softly, her voice trembling slightly. The man looked down at her and gave a small, respectful nod. "I am a friend," he said simply. "A friend who wishes to share something with you." The words were quiet, but they carried a meaning far deeper than the children expected. For a moment the room fell silent, each child imagining what a friend might bring on such a morning. Could it be toys? Could it be food? Could it be something magical that would make this Christmas feel like the stories they had always heard but never truly experienced? Their imaginations ran wild, but they remained cautious, not daring to hope too strongly. The man opened his satchel slowly, as if revealing a secret only he knew. Inside were small bundles wrapped carefully, each one tied with simple string. There were no bright colors or fancy paper, just the quiet thoughtfulness of someone who had taken time to prepare for this moment. He placed the bundles on the floor, gesturing for the children to come closer. "These are for you," he said softly. The children hesitated, unsure if they were allowed to touch them. Mrs. Lillian encouraged them gently. "Go on," she said. "They are for you." One by one the children approached, their eyes wide with amazement. When Emily picked up the first bundle, she found a small blanket, soft and warm, with tiny stitched patterns along the edges. Her fingers traced the careful stitches, and she realized that someone had taken the time to make this just for her. Her eyes welled up with tears, and she held it to her chest, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the cold. Thomas opened another bundle and found a small wooden toy carved with skill and painted with care. It was simple yet perfect, and he immediately understood that it was not just a toy, but a gift made with thought and love. The other children followed, discovering small treasures, handmade dolls, tiny ornaments, knitted mittens, and other items that were both practical and beautiful. Each item told a story of patience and care, a quiet gesture that made the orphanage feel alive in a way it hadn't all morning. The man watched the children carefully, smiling just slightly as if he had expected their reactions. He did not speak much, letting the gifts do the talking. The children's laughter began to fill the room, soft at first, then louder, more confident, until it echoed off the walls in a way that made even Mrs. Lillian's heart swell. The orphanage, which had felt so empty only hours ago, now seemed alive with joy. Emily ran to the fireplace and wrapped her new blanket around herself, twirling like a little princess. Thomas showed his toy to the older children, who nodded approvingly and began to make plans to play with it after breakfast. Even the teenagers, who had been quietly sitting in the corner, unable to hide their disappointment earlier, smiled genuinely as they discovered the small gifts meant just for them. For the first time that day, the children felt seen, remembered, and cared for. The man did not rush them. He sat quietly in the corner, watching, and occasionally offering a nod or a small word of encouragement. He seemed to understand that the children needed to explore their gifts at their own pace, to feel the surprise and delight in their own way. There was a calm authority in his presence, a sense that everything would be all right, even if only for a short while. Mrs. Trimes. Lillian, standing nearby, felt tears prick her eyes. She had seen many people bring donations, many strangers who tried to help. But something about this man was different. It wasn't just the gifts, it was the care, the thoughtfulness, the quiet way he had entered their lives and made them feel special, without a word of boasting or show. It reminded her of what Christmas was truly about. Not the bright wrapping paper or noisy celebrations, but kindness, attention, and the willingness to reach out to those who needed it most. The children gathered around the man, asking him questions about the gifts, about where they came from, and about why he had come. He answered softly, sharing bits of his life, the simple lessons he had learned, and stories from a place far away, where people cared deeply for one another and understood the importance of giving without expecting anything in return. The children listened, captivated by his words, feeling as if they were part of a world much larger and kinder than the one they had known. By the time the morning turned to early afternoon, the orphanage had transformed. The children played with their new gifts, the room buzzing with laughter and excitement. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside, warmth and happiness filled every corner. Mrs. Lillian looked around, her heart full, realizing that sometimes miracles came quietly, without fanfare, from unexpected places. And in that moment, the children of the small orphanage learned a lesson far greater than any present could teach, that hope, kindness, and generosity could arrive even in the most unexpected ways, and that sometimes the simplest gestures carried the deepest meaning. The room felt different now. Just hours earlier, it had been quiet and heavy with disappointment. But now, laughter floated through the air, light and warm, bouncing from wall to wall like music. The children moved around excitedly, showing each other their gifts, touching them again and again as if to make sure they were real. Emily wrapped her small blanket tightly around her shoulders and pretended it was a royal cape. Thomas pushed his wooden toy across the floor, smiling in a way Mrs. Lillian had not seen in weeks. The quiet man sat near the window, watching the children with calm eyes. He did not speak much, but his presence felt steady, like a warm fire on a cold night. Whenever a child looked his way, he returned a gentle smile or a small nod, as if encouraging them to enjoy the moment fully. He seemed content just to be there, surrounded by joy he had helped create. After some time, Mrs. Lillian clapped her hands softly. "All right, everyone," she said kindly. "Why don't we sit together for a bit? Let's enjoy this moment as one big family." The children slowly gathered on the floor and on the old chairs, forming a loose circle around the quiet visitor. Some hugged their gifts close. Others leaned against friends or siblings. Emily sat beside Thomas, her feet swinging gently as she watched the man with wide eyes. "My name is Eli," the man said at last, breaking the silence. His voice was calm and low, but strong. "I come from people who believe deeply in sharing what they have, especially during hard times." The children listened carefully. His voice had a soothing rhythm, like a story being told beside a campfire. No one interrupted. No one fidgeted. Even the youngest ones seemed drawn in by the peaceful tone he used. "Where do you live?" one of the older boys asked. "I travel," Eli replied simply. "I go where I feel I'm needed." The children whispered among themselves, wondering how someone could live like that, moving from place to place with only a satchel and a kind heart. Lillian offered him a cup of cocoa, which he accepted with a polite nod. "Thank you," he said. "Warm drinks remind me of winter mornings from my childhood." The children leaned forward. Childhood stories always caught their attention. "When I was young," Eli continued, "my people taught me something important. They said, a gift is not just something you give. It's something you share from your heart. Emily frowned slightly, trying to understand. What does that mean? She asked. It means, Eli explained gently, that even your time, your kindness, your smile, those are gifts too. Sometimes they are the best ones. The room grew quiet as the children thought about his words. Many of them had very little, but they did have each other. They had laughter, stories, and comfort during hard nights. Maybe those things mattered more than they had realized. Thomas raised his hand. Did you always want to help people? He asked. Eli smiled faintly. Not always. When I was young, I was quiet like I am now. I watched more than I spoke. But one winter, when my family was struggling, a stranger helped us. He gave us food, warm clothes, and something more important, hope. That moment stayed with me. I learned that one small act can change a whole day, sometimes even a whole life. Mrs. Lillian felt her chest tighten. She had often wondered how much small acts really mattered. Now, sitting in a room filled with smiling children, she saw the truth of those words. The children began to ask more questions. Did you make the gifts yourself? How long did it take? Why did you come here? Eli answered each one patiently. Yes, he had made many of the gifts himself, some during long nights, others while traveling. He said he came because he heard the orphanage might be having a quiet Christmas, and he felt in his heart that he should visit. I believe, he said softly, that when something inside you says, go, you should listen. The children nodded, though some of them didn't fully understand, but they felt the truth in his words. Mrs. Lillian suggested they play a game together, something simple that everyone could enjoy. They cleared a space in the center of the room, and Eli stood with the children, showing them an old game he had learned as a boy. It involved passing a small object while music played softly, then sharing a kind thought when the music stopped. At first, the children were shy, but soon, laughter filled the room again. When Emily ended up holding the object, she smiled and said, I'm thankful for my brother. Thomas blushed and ruffled her hair. Another child said, I'm thankful for warm blankets. A third said, I'm thankful for today. When it was Eli's turn, he paused and said, I'm thankful for rooms like this, places where people still believe in kindness. Mrs. Lillian felt tears fill her eyes again, but this time they were warm tears, not sad ones. After the game, Eli sat down with a few of the children and showed them how to carve small shapes from soft wood using simple tools. He worked slowly and carefully, teaching them how to shape the wood without hurting themselves. His hands moved with skill, but also with patience. This takes time, he told them. Good things usually do. Thomas watched closely, fascinated.
Can I try? He asked.
Eli nodded. Of course. Just remember, slow and steady. Thomas tried, making a few uneven cuts at first. But Eli encouraged him, guiding his hands and showing him how to smooth the edges. When Thomas finally held a small wooden star in his palm, his eyes shone with pride. I made this, he said. Yes, Eli replied warmly, and that means something. Other children wanted to try too. Soon, the table was filled with small wooden shapes, stars, hearts, animals, and little trees. Each one was different, imperfect, and beautiful in its own way. Mrs. Lillian watched the scene with amazement. She had never seen the children so focused, so calm, yet so joyful. There was no rushing, no arguing, just quiet excitement and shared learning. Later, Eli gathered the children again and told them a story from his youth. He spoke of a long winter when food was scarce, and his village came together to help one another. Those who had more shared with those who had less. Those who were strong helped those who were tired. And in the end, everyone survived, not because they had much, but because they had each other. What matters most, Eli said, is not what you own, but who stands beside you. The children listened closely. Some leaned against friends. Others held their gifts gently, understanding now that these objects were symbols of something deeper: care, connection, and hope. Emily raised her hand again. "Will you stay with us?" she asked softly. Ellie smiled, but there was sadness in his eyes. "Not long," he said. "My path continues. But I will stay long enough to share today with you." That answer made the children quiet for a moment. They didn't want this calm, kind man to leave, but something about his honesty made them respect his journey. Mrs. Lillian brought out lunch: simple soup, bread, and fruit. But today even this modest meal felt special. The children sat together talking excitedly about what they had learned and what they had made. Some showed their wooden shapes to each other, proud of their work. Others wrapped their blankets around their shoulders or hugged their dolls close. Eli ate quietly, listening more than speaking, smiling when the children laughed, nodding when they shared stories. He seemed happiest just being part of the room. After lunch, the children asked him to teach them a song. He hesitated at first, then softly began to hum a melody. It was gentle and steady, like a river flowing through calm land. The words were simple and spoke of kindness, unity, and hope. The children repeated after him, slowly at first, then with growing confidence. Soon their voices filled the orphanage, blending together in a way that felt warm and powerful. Mrs. Lillian stood near the door, listening, her heart full. It wasn't a grand performance. There were no instruments, no fancy notes, but it was honest, and it was beautiful. When the song ended, the room stayed quiet for a moment. No one wanted to break the feeling. "You see," Eli said softly, "you don't need much to make something meaningful. You just need heart." The children nodded, some of them not fully understanding the words, but feeling their truth. As the afternoon light streamed through the windows, casting golden patterns on the floor, the orphanage felt more alive than it had in a long time. The walls still looked the same. The furniture was still old. But something inside had changed. Hope had arrived. Not in loud ways, not in shiny packages, but in stories, shared moments, and gentle lessons that would stay with the children long after this day ended. Mrs. Bates and Lillian looked around at the smiling faces, the handmade wooden shapes, the quiet laughter, and the calm man who had walked into their lives so unexpectedly. She realized that this Christmas, though simple, would be one they would never forget. And as Eli sat quietly among the children, listening to their stories and watching their joy, he knew that he had come to the right place, not just to give gifts, but to remind them and himself of something far greater. As the afternoon passed, a quiet calm settled over the orphanage. The children had played, sung, and crafted small wooden shapes under Eli's guidance, yet a sense of curiosity lingered in the room. Who was this quiet man? And why had he chosen their little orphanage on a cold, snowy Christmas day? Though their gifts and games had brought laughter, the children felt there was something more to learn from him, something deeper that went beyond presents and fun. Eli noticed this in their eyes, the questions that hovered silently. He stood and gently gestured for the children to gather around him. They moved closer, forming a circle again, each holding their new treasures or their blankets, their faces reflecting anticipation. Even the older children, who had been skeptical and quiet earlier in the day, edged nearer, eager to hear the stories that seemed to linger behind his calm eyes. "Today," Eli began, his voice steady and soft, "I want to tell you about something important. It is not about toys or blankets or even food. It is about something that stays with you forever. It is about giving, helping, and caring for each other. And it is about hope." The children leaned forward. Even the youngest, like Emily, sat cross-legged on the floor, her doll tucked under one arm. "Hope?" she asked, tilting her head. "Yes, hope," Eli said. "Hope is what keeps people going when the world seems cold and hard. Hope is what makes a small act of kindness feel like the biggest treasure in the world." He paused, looking around the room. "And hope is something you can share with others, even when you have very little yourself." Thomas raised his hand hesitantly. "How can we have hope when we don't have much?" he asked. "We don't have toys, or lots of food, or nice clothes." Eli smiled gently. "That is exactly why hope matters the most. When you have little, Even the smallest kindness becomes very important. A smile, a kind word, a small gift. These are not small at all. They can change someone's day, even their life. You may not realize it yet, but every kind thing you do for someone else grows inside them. And that growth never disappears. The children thought about this quietly. Some of them had spent the morning worried, feeling left out of the Christmas celebrations they had imagined. Now, listening to Eli, they began to understand that there were other ways to celebrate, ways that did not need ribbons, wrapping paper, or expensive gifts.
Eli continued, "Let me tell you a story.
When I was a boy, my family had very little. One winter, our food ran out, and we were cold. I thought Christmas would be just like today, a day of nothing. But a stranger came. He brought food, warm clothes, and a few small toys. That was not the most important part. The most important part was that he showed us that people cared. He showed us that even when life is hard, kindness exists. That day, I learned that a single act of care could light up the darkest moment." The children listened in silence.
Emily clutched her blanket tightly. "So that's why you came here?" she asked.
"Yes," Eli replied softly. "I came because I wanted to share a little hope with you, just like someone once shared hope with me." The older children looked thoughtful. They were beginning to understand that the gifts, the stories, and the games were more than entertainment. They were lessons about life, kindness, and courage. The simple wooden shapes they had carved now seemed like symbols of something larger, something they could carry with them long after the snow had melted and the warmth of the fireplace had faded. Eli stood and walked slowly among the children, his eyes meeting theirs, one by one. "Now, I want to ask you to do something," he said. "I want you to think about someone else today, someone who might need a smile, a kind word, or a little help. It could be your friend, your sibling, or even someone you do not know. Think about what you can give, not what you have, but what you can share from your heart." The children hesitated at first. Giving when they had so little seemed strange, but then they began to smile at each other. Emily whispered to Thomas, "We can give hugs." Thomas laughed quietly. "And we can help clean up the room for Mrs. Lillian." A few of the older children nodded in agreement. "We can share our food," one said.
Or make someone a small wooden shape like Eli showed us.
Eli nodded approvingly.
Every small act matters. You will see, even one small thing can grow into something big. The world becomes brighter when people care for each other. To help the children understand, Eli suggested a little project. "Let's make something together," he said. "Something we can share with others tomorrow. We will use these wooden shapes, paper, and any materials you have. We will create small gifts that show we care. They do not have to be perfect. They only have to come from the heart." The children jumped to work. Laughter filled the air as they carved, glued, and decorated. Some made tiny wooden animals. Others wrote small notes with kind words. Emily made a small paper star with a smiling face, while Thomas carved a tiny wooden heart. The older children helped the younger ones, showing patience and care. For the first time, they felt truly connected, working together towards something meaningful. Mrs. Lillian watched from a distance, tears threatening to fall again. The transformation in her children was remarkable. A few hours ago, the room had been silent and heavy with sadness. Now it was alive with creativity, laughter, and the beginnings of understanding. She realized that Eli was teaching them more than carving or crafting. He was teaching them empathy, patience, and the joy of giving. Eli sat back and watched the children. "You see," he said, "what you do for each other, even the smallest things, can last a long time. People may forget the presents they received, but they will remember the love and care they felt."
Emily, holding her paper star, looked up at him.
"Will people like these gifts?" she asked. Eli smiled warmly. "Yes, they will. Because they will feel your heart in them. That is the most important thing."
As the afternoon continued, Eli shared more stories.
Some were about his childhood in the Apache community, where people always looked out for one another. Others were about simple lessons in life: how to be patient, how to find happiness in small things, how to treat others with respect and care. The children hung on every word, absorbing the lessons without even realizing it. By the time the sun began to dip low, casting long shadows across the orphanage floor, the children had finished their small gifts. Each one was unique and imperfect, but full of meaning. They lined them up on the table and admired the work of their friends. Eli walked around, nodding, a quiet smile on his face. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will share these gifts. You will see the happiness that comes from giving, and you will remember today, not because of what you received, but because of what you shared." The children nodded eagerly. They were beginning to understand that Christmas was not just about receiving, but about giving in ways that mattered. They felt pride, joy, and a quiet excitement for the next day, when they would take their creations to others and see hope spread through small acts of kindness. Lillian, standing at the back of the room, felt a warmth in her heart. She realized that this Christmas, though different from any she had planned, was more meaningful than any in the past. Her children were learning lessons that would stay with them forever. Lessons of hope, kindness, and the simple power of giving from the heart. Eli stood quietly by the window, watching the last of the sunlight fade and reflecting on the day. He had come with gifts, yes, but he had also shared something far greater. A vision of hope, a sense of purpose, and a reminder that even the smallest acts of care could make a world of difference. The children gathered for a final moment before supper, holding their gifts and smiling proudly. "Thank you, Eli," Emily whispered, hugging him gently. Thomas added, "You taught us something we will never forget." Eli nodded, looking around at the small, warm faces. "I am glad," he said softly. "Remember, you can share hope every day, not just at Christmas. The world becomes brighter when you do." As the night fell and the first stars appeared in the sky, the orphanage was filled with a calm joy that came not from presents or decorations, but from lessons learned. Hearts opened and the knowledge that even in a small place, hope could grow and spread. And so, Christmas at the small orphanage became more than a day of empty walls or quiet disappointment. It became a day of learning, giving, and understanding. A day where the children realized that hope could arrive in many forms, sometimes quietly, sometimes from someone they had never met, but always with the power to change lives. As evening approached, the orphanage was filled with a quiet excitement that had nothing to do with gifts or decorations. The children were tired but happy, their hands still carrying the small wooden shapes, paper stars, and handmade notes they had created under Eli's guidance. The room smelled faintly of cocoa and warm blankets, and the soft glow of the fireplace cast dancing shadows across the walls. It was a cozy, magical feeling, even though the building itself was still plain and small. Mrs. Lillian walked around making sure everyone was comfortable. She had prepared a simple supper: bread, soup, and fruit, but tonight, the food felt like more than just a meal. It felt like a celebration of something deeper. She watched the children chat and laugh quietly with each other, helping one another and sharing their creations. The transformation that had begun in the afternoon was now complete. The room that had once felt heavy and bare now glowed with warmth, hope, and happiness. Eli sat quietly in the corner, watching the children with gentle eyes. He had shared stories, taught lessons, and inspired acts of kindness all day, but he knew his work was not done yet. There was one more thing he wanted the children to experience before he left. "Tomorrow," he said softly, gathering everyone's attention, "we will share what you have made with others. You will see that giving from the heart creates a happiness that comes back to you in ways you cannot imagine. But tonight, let us take a moment to reflect on what we have learned today." The children settled down, their gifts clutched close. Some leaned against friends or siblings, while others held their hands to their hearts, thinking carefully about Eli's words. Even the teenagers, who had been quiet or skeptical earlier, sat with attentive faces. "Remember," Eli continued, "the greatest gifts are not things you can hold. They are the love you share, the help you give, and the kindness you show. Even small acts, like helping a friend, sharing a smile, or giving a simple gift, can become something very big inside someone's heart. That is the kind of magic that lasts forever. The children listened, and slowly their eyes began to shine with understanding. They realized that Christmas was no longer about what they had or hadn't received. It was about what they could give, how they could care for one another, and how even small acts of kindness could create hope in the darkest moments. Emily leaned over to Thomas and whispered, "I think I understand now. Even if we don't have many things, we can still make someone happy." Thomas nodded, hugging his wooden heart tightly. "Yes," he said softly, "and that makes Christmas the best it can be." Eli smiled faintly at the children's understanding. He had come to give them gifts, yes, but the true gift had always been the lessons they were learning, the lessons of hope, empathy, and generosity. He knew that if they carried these lessons forward, their lives would be richer, brighter, and full of meaning, long after he had left. Mrs. Owls. Lillian felt a warmth in her heart that she had not felt in years. Her children were not just smiling, they were learning, understanding, and sharing in a way that was rare and precious. She walked around the room, touching the shoulders of her children gently, reminding them that even in simple ways they could make the world a better place. As the last of the daylight faded, Eli stood and gathered his satchel. The children watched him silently, some of them feeling the first pangs of sadness that he might leave. He knelt down to their level and spoke quietly. "I must continue on my journey," he said, "but I will leave something with you that cannot be taken away, the knowledge that hope and kindness are always stronger than fear or sadness." "Will we ever see you again?" she asked softly.
Eli smiled, though there was a hint of sadness in his expression.
"Perhaps," he said. "But even if you don't, remember what you have learned today. Share it with others, and you will carry me with you in your actions, your words, and your hearts." One by one, the children approached Eli, hugging him gently, thanking him for the gifts, the stories, and the lessons. Their voices were soft, but full of genuine gratitude. Thomas shook his hand firmly and said, "You've made this Christmas the best we've ever had."
Eli nodded, his heart warmed by their sincerity.
Before leaving, Eli wrote a small note for Mrs. Lillian. It was simple but powerful, filled with encouragement to continue nurturing hope, love, and generosity within the orphanage. She read it quietly, tears spilling down her cheeks. She knew that this note, like Eli's presence, would be a reminder for her and the children for years to come. The children lined up near the door to say goodbye. One by one, they waved, some shyly, some with wide smiles. Then Eli stepped out into the snowy evening, his coat wrapped tightly around him, the satchel still over his shoulder. The wind caught gently at the edges of his coat, and the snowflakes danced around him as if celebrating the day's events. He gave one last nod to the children and Mrs. Kugori, Lillian before disappearing down the quiet street, leaving behind a room filled with warmth, hope, and unforgettable memories. As the door closed behind him, the children turned to each other, their faces glowing with excitement and joy.
Did you feel that? Emily asked. It's like he left a little magic in the room.
Yes, and it's not just magic, it's hope. I think we understand it now. The children gathered around the small table with their handmade gifts, looking at what they had created with a sense of pride and purpose. Even the simplest shapes and notes felt precious, because they were made with thought, care, and love. They knew that tomorrow, when they shared these gifts with others, they would be spreading hope and joy, just as Eli had shown them.
Mrs. Abba!
Lillian gathered the children for a small prayer of thanks. They held hands, heads bowed, and spoke softly together. "Thank you for today. Thank you for hope, kindness, and love. Help us share it with everyone around us." The children felt a sense of peace settle over them. They had experienced something extraordinary, not because of what they had received, but because of what they had learned. They understood that giving, caring, and sharing were the most valuable gifts anyone could offer. That night, as the children lay in their beds, they held their new blankets, toys, and handmade creations close. But more importantly, they held in their hearts the lessons Eli had taught them: hope, Kindness and generosity filled their dreams, and even in the quiet darkness, they felt a warm light glowing within them. The orphanage, which had seemed so bare and cold in the morning, was now alive with a new spirit. The children talked softly among themselves, planning little acts of kindness for the next day, helping each other, sharing food, baking small gifts for neighbors, and showing care in ways big and small. The magic of Eli's visit had awakened a sense of purpose and love that would not fade with the snow or the seasons. Mrs. Trotto. Lillian looked around the room one last time before going to her own small bed. She realized that Christmas had arrived in a way she could never have planned. It had come quietly, through the unexpected presence of a stranger who had shown the children, and herself, the true meaning of hope and giving. Even though Eli was gone, his lessons stayed. They would carry his words in their hearts, remember the stories, and continue to share kindness and care with everyone around them. That Christmas would be remembered forever, not for presents or decorations, but for the arrival of a quiet Apache man who brought gifts of hope and reminded them all that even in the darkest times, light could be found in the simplest acts of love. And so, the night ended peacefully, the orphanage warm with laughter, dreams, and hearts full of hope. The children had learned that true Christmas magic was not in the things they could hold, but in the love, generosity, and hope they could share. It was a day they would never forget, a day when kindness arrived quietly, but left an impact that would last a lifetime.